The question is that the liquor amendment and small bills be read a second time. I call the member for Balmain.
Thank you very much, Mr Temporary Speaker, and thank you for the opportunity to make a contribution to the Liquor Amendment Small Bars Bill 2013. I'm delighted to be here this evening to discuss this bill. I'm broadly, along with my Greens colleagues, of course, supportive of this bill. We see this as a step forward. I will be raising a few questions, but on the whole, it's clear that the bill is moving absolutely in the right direction. And the bill proposes to amend the Liquor Act 2007, which was an important hallmark, really, in the development of small bars, introducing for the first time this new type of licence for small bars with patrons limited to a maximum of 60. This is to be implemented across the state, but of course has its origins in the King's Cross Management Plan. So the conditions particular to these small bars will be defined as limited to a maximum of 60 patrons. New small bars will be allowed within liquor-free areas such as King's Cross. Standard operating hours for small bars will be noon to midnight. For small bars outside of liquor-free areas, extending trading authorisation is automatically granted until 2 a.m, and bars can apply for extensions beyond that until 5 a.m. It prohibits gaming machines, as we've heard, and development consent is required under the EPNA Act to use the premises of a small bar, and the local police and Director General are to be notified within 2 working days after the application for the required development consent has been made. A 3-year review, as we've heard from other members, is important. It's an important way to determine whether some of the factors which have been questioned in the bill are working, in particular the limit of 60 patrons. I should note, and I have mentioned this to the Minister, that in the electorate of Balmain we have some, this is not going to be a speech about how wonderful the electorate is, we have quite a few small bars, in particular in Glebe, in Balmain, in Leichhardt. There are small bars throughout the electorate. Vinoteca in Leichhardt in particular is a new small bar that's open. We've got the Little Guy in Glebe, Mr Falcons, Sappho's in Glebe, Berkelo Books, a great little wine bar in Leichhardt. And I don't say that to talk about the electorate necessarily, but to say that our experience, and my experience on Leichhardt Council, I was on Leichhardt Council since 1999 and served as the mayor from 2008 to I was elected to this place, demonstrated that there is a need. There is a definite need for small bars, and even areas in the inner west, like Leichhardt and Glebe, have significant problems, and in Balmain as well, with alcohol-related violence. And I believe that this is an important part of solving that problem, but it's also an important part of promoting vibrancy, entrepreneurism, entrepreneurial approaches from people in our local community, and giving owners of retail properties opportunities to have a diverse type of investment with the fit out and all other things that go with a small bar. When it comes to the legislation, I wanted to talk a little bit about the history of it, but first by way of addressing any potential problems in the future. The legislation does rely on the EPNA Act quite significantly, and I understand Minister Hazzard is undertaking a very significant review of planning legislation here in New South Wales, and I assume it's been covered, but that the Minister's office should ensure that there's good communication with the Minister for Planning so there aren't any unintended consequences with the significant review that is taking place by the Department of Planning. Minister Hazzard has entered into very broad-ranging consultations, and it's a very complex part of the world, planning legislation, but that's just something that I ask that the Minister take into account. I suspect his department already has, just to make sure that it gives people confidence that after the planning review is completed that it won't lead to any consequences which impact on the accountability and openness of the process when it comes to the main, I think, point of this legislation, not to require a community impact statement. Now, I've spoken to quite a few small bars in my area and other liquor outlets. One of the things people often don't understand is the community impact statement is not cheap. These things can run for $15,000. I've seen a CIS that costs $15,000. I'm sure a lot of people have also been involved in the community impact statement. It's not a cheap process. So people have said to me, oh, well, it doesn't really matter that no CIS is involved, but it is really important, especially when it comes to inner city communities. And I'm sure that the members of Vaucluse will know, we've got very engaged, active, vocal, well-educated people who will ensure that their voices are heard and that the community is respected. And what that means is that the community impact statement can be a very difficult, complex process with a whole lot of submissions, which is quite expensive. So we want to reduce that burden on small bar owners to ensure that those people that are engaging in the responsible sale of alcohol in these smaller environments can do so in a way which isn't overly impeded by the requirements of the CIS. I think it's important for us also to mention, I did want to mention the Lord Mayor of Sydney, the former Member for Sydney, Clover Moore, because the genesis of this, I believe, was importantly carried. You know, the standard was carried by Clover Moore in 2007 when she looked at trying to legislate the definition of small bars and advocated, you know, decreasing the licensing burden and so on. In particular, the application fees. But as you know, it was defeated, and the Labor government introduced an act which had a lot of similarities, the 2000 Civil Liquor Act, which was a positive step forward. So I acknowledge the role of Clover Moore, former Member of Sydney, but also the former government that got, you know, dragged into that position. In my view, it was something that was a long time coming. And I know even when I was a councillor and mayor of my council, it was something which was recognised as being very important. The issue of the absence of a legislative definition led to the City of Sydney really defining small bars with no more than 120 patrons. I'm sure the Minister, who I should say is here in the debate, which is a very positive thing and shows his commitment to this legislation, that 120 patrons is something the City of Sydney has used, and as the Member for Sydney said, the Late Night Economy group that came together, looked at numbers, weighed numbers and came down on 120. The government's come down on 60, and I understand the government may be able to be flexible around those numbers in the future, but I would encourage the government and the Minister's Department to be aware of this number to see whether or not 60 is providing an impediment to businesses investing because the number may be too low. And that is something that I think that time will tell. In my electorate, as I've mentioned to the Minister, I have a small wine bar too, in fact, with less than 60 patrons. Less than the opportunity for 60 patrons. They often have more than 60 patrons in terms of the spirit for the place, but obviously 60 is the maximum of absolute people that can be in that bar. I also noticed in February this year, the South Australian Parliament passed a bill legislating the definition of a small bar licence, capping it at 120 patrons. It'll be starting off in the CBD for the first 12 months, after which I'll be extended to other areas by regulation. In the South Australian debate, the opposition wanted the cap set at 80, and the AHA wanted to see it at less than 100. Now that's significant because the AHA has typically not been the strongest advocate for small bars, and so it's something that I would hope that we look at very seriously and very closely, because it is a contested area, the sale of alcohol. It's something that we know has been, in our view, we've been concerned about the role of the Australian Hotels Association and clubs in terms of a response to alcohol-related problems. And we've heard that Four Corners story mentioned before. The Last Drinks campaign has some problems, but there are many things to look at that campaign and see how effective it's been, particularly in Newcastle. We've heard other members saying it's an individual responsibility, but we know that in Newcastle, when trading hours were restricted, a dramatic reduction in assaults. So we know that changing regulations can make a difference, and I encourage the government to continue to look at other ways that we can minimise the impact of alcohol, in particularly its negative impacts when it comes to antisocial behaviour and a whole range of other factors that are present in our community. So it's important that we try and promote this diversity with this legislation, and I look forward to the time when we don't have this proliferation of beer bars and this culture, as we've talked about, but also good, strong regulations to make sure that while alcohol can be enjoyed, that it shouldn't be abused, and that alcohol is something that's looked upon, as we see in several European countries, where we have that less of a culture of drinking till we get drunk. So in conclusion, Mr Temporary Speaker, we're going to support the bill. We recognise the work that's gone into this. It's probably an enjoyable part of the Minister's portfolio compared to some other areas, but it's something that we acknowledge as a step forward. We look forward to seeing in particular if, just the two questions that I mentioned, looking at the EPN Act to ensure there will be no unintended consequences from the Minister's review, and secondly, this issue of 60 versus 120. The question's been asked before, but why was that 60 arrived at? And to make sure that in the future, if there are options to move that number, that they're taken by the government and by the department. So finally, I'll just say thank you to the Minister and all the departmental staff. I know they will do a heck of a job, working very hard to get these bills to the House. Thank you.